Welcome to Kit 133A. We are talking about Kit 133A. If you receive multiple kits from us, make sure that you look at the side of the box or on your bottle to see that it's 133A. And without further ado, our panelists for today, Evan Goldstein in San Francisco. Evan?
Hola, hola, hola from San Francisco. Gorgeous day out here. Not too hot, not too cold, as the Three Bears said, just right. That porridge, that is.
Oh, awesome. And Madeline Triffon calling in from Michigan.
From Metro Detroit, and I would say we have a beautiful day too. And I'm inspired to say "Tikana tepedakia," which means "How are you, kids?" in Greek.
Wonderful. And Tim, great to have you on here as well. Tim from New Mexico.
Hi, everybody from sunny Rio Rancho, and thrilled to be here. Also thrilled to be out of quarantine too. So,
Well, the good news is that you could be in quarantine with Master of the World with a kid right now if you need to be.
yeah, and as a matter of fact, I was in quarantine for about a week in this room. So, yeah, good to be here.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. Without further ado, we're going to go straight to wine number one so that we have ample time for all 6 wines. You know the drill. We're going to taste along with you. We do have polls today, so you're going to guess along. The polls are anonymous, so we won't be able to grade you on your answers. And putting yourself out there hopefully will translate into more learning. So without further ado, Madeline, you're up for wine number one.
I'm up with wine number one, and the questions that we have up here are just general considerations. For, sometimes the mind needs something to hang on to, especially if you're not super practiced about doing this. And I would say with this particular wine, perhaps even ask yourself the question, is this wine highly aromatic, moderately, or lowly aromatic, non-aromatic? And the issue of texture, how it feels, is also often a big tell and completes the picture of the wine. So visually, and no point in slamming through this even on whites because it tells a story. This wine is brilliant. In my glass, it's actually a pale yellow with green glints, and it moves rapidly. It gives the impression of moderate alcohol levels, because to remind us on whites, when you have thick, slowly running tears, it's usually an indication of a combination of alcohol and or sugar, and extract always, of course. So when I talk about fragrance and flavor, I'm really talking about it as one, because that's what it is. And as we know, when we can't smell, we can't taste much other than, sweet, sour, bitter, salt, and the beloved umami. So aromatically, this wine is forward to me. I immediately get a flush of very pretty, ripe green apples and a floral aroma that's citrusy, so like lemon and lime blossoms. And also citrus fruit itself, notably lemon for certain, ripe lemon, maybe even Meyer lemon and lime, and a whiff of grapefruit, though it's not dominant, and it's white grapefruit, not pink. I'm going to take it on the palate right away. I am getting a little bit of gentle vanilla, but I'm not going to run to the conclusion that this wine has seen oak right away, because that would be premature. I'm going to take it on the palate. There's another aspect to this wine that as the attack comes through, and then mid-palate and the finish, there is a prominent, even aggressive minerality to this wine. Minerality, that beautiful word that is very hard to describe, especially to consumers, but it's as if a rockiness comes from inside of the wine. And in this case, it's positively salty. I can tell the finish is going to be long because it is extending and swelling. Everything I smelled on the nose is reflected on the palate. Very bright, clean, clear citrus in the form of lemon, yuzu, lime, teeny little bit of grapefruit, but again, not dominant, a little bit of green melon. If I were to say there's any stone fruit, it's probably unripe peach and nectarine. We all know what that tastes like because we always try to eat the things before they're ripe, right? And in terms of addressing the oak factor, I have a suspicion more from here than from here that this has possibly been barrel fermented. But I don't think in any new oak, because I don't get any overt character. I get this very gentle backtone of vanilla. I also get a richness, beyond the mouth-watering acidity that's like pulling my attention because it's high. There is a richness that probably comes from lees contact. It's very long, very fresh. And again, back tones of maybe a little bit of corn and ginger, both of which speak to possible mallow, partial mallow, and oak. It is extended. It is driven both by fresh, tart citrus and tree fruit, and a strong mineral, aka inorganic earth component. I will say without hesitation that the quality level seems very high on this white wine. Okie dokie.
Great.
Shall
Natalie,
we
we have
move?
one
Mhm.
question here from Jerry. I think
Okay,
it's a really good question to open with,
alrighty.
since it refers to sight. So, what is the difference between brilliant and very brilliant? I
Thank
think,
you, because no, I'll address that because I'm having a hard time with my getting into the chat room. So brilliant, and well, you don't have to agonize at most. It's very, use your common sense when you look at it. If it's so shiny, you notice it, to the point where it's refracting light with great enthusiasm. That's brilliant. Bright simply means bright. You know that the wine is clear. It's got plenty of reflection. When you move into something that's a little bit more mute or clouded, it's not a negative thing, but again, less reflection of light, especially in a white, it's quite noticeable, but that's not necessarily a negative thing. It could be from racking directly off lees, because some winemakers are very particular about that. Also being particular, not over fine or filter, and sometimes not at all. So I think of it as brilliant, bright, clear, and I don't think I want to use the word murky, but I often use the word a bit clouded. And Tim is being expressive in the chat room. Yay.
and I think, Evan, one question, and I don't want to take too much away from your wine one, but Evan, because we debate over these sorts of things when we taste, the difference between pink grapefruit and white grapefruit. Are we being too persnickety? Is
No,
there
no, absolutely no. Pink grapefruit is sweeter and riper. Yellow grapefruit tends to be tart and sharp. And if you think about the difference between a green apple, a yellow apple, and a red apple, the same thing really applies to grapefruit, between sort of the yellow colored grapefruit and pink colored grapefruit, which tends to, again, have a sweeter element to it. Forget the color. If you were just literally blindfolded and had two segments of grapefruit, the yellow one would be sharper and brighter in your mouth. The pink one, a little bit more muted and definitely on the sweeter side.
great?
I will remind everyone, by the way, that sometimes the first attack of acidity and tannin, you can actually miscall it in terms of quantifying it because your palate hasn't gotten used to it. Because going back to the wine, to me, the acidity is still high, right? Alcohol, by the way, is moderate. It doesn't pull my attention. The finish we've talked is long, and I think this is a young wine that's got complexity and gaining complexity, but my palate is already adjusted to the acidity. So it comes off a little bit softer on the second approach on the palate, and it's easier for me to pick up other flavor components. And I think we should go to the next slide, which is giving you options. So remember what I said at the very beginning? We have Sauvignon Blanc that is, and by the way, this is, remember, nobody's going to know who you are. And you're doing us all a big favor. Oops, can we put it up? Did it go away?
Oh, that's
The poll. You're doing us a favor too if you run towards filling this out, especially if you think it's something else. And you can always put that in the chat room if you feel like it. But one look at the bottle is worth a lot of money, right? So it's very good to know what impression you're getting as you are tasting it truly blind. And we have Sauvignon Blanc, which is a highly aromatic variety by anybody's measure. If it's not, it's very disappointing. You have Albarino, that in my opinion is semi-aromatic, verging on high, depending on the particular expression and the producer and the age and the quality. And you have Chardonnay that really takes its character from where it's grown and how it's handled, right? You would call it a non-aromatic variety. It certainly doesn't lack anything qualitatively in the right hands and grown in the right places. And then in terms of the regions, here we have, the time-honored Old World, New World, with Albarino in Spain, with Chardonnay could be, well, anywhere, but in terms of amount grown, certainly France, and then the New World, both Chile and New Zealand, no more famous in Chile, I think. And then Sauvignon Blanc expressed in France and New Zealand and Chile. So I was thinking something else entirely, Sauvignon Blanc from Savennier. There's no whoops. Good for you that you're saying it out loud. That high acidity, absolutely. The aromatics could lead you there. So thank you for your honesty. And I think we are ready to see how
let's see what the
poll-
results are. We've
Yeah.
got about 60% of folks who think that it's Albarino/Alvarino.
Okay.
And there is sort of a small contingent, but it's kind of mixed around. I think it's confusing. And frankly, I'm a little confused by this wine as well. And I'm looking at Old World versus New World. 60 and 20 on Spain and France add up to 80% of us are thinking that it is in the Old World, and then 20% in the New World. So
I think we should reveal, because I think this is a great teaching moment for all of us, and I include me. Because where are we? Well, we're starting in Evan's home in San Francisco.
Yep.
And then we're going to take a little trip. And we're going a little more slowly today, so we don't need a seatbelt. We can fly without our seatbelt.
Yes,
And
we slowed it down. I think that we wanted to be able to see exactly where we were going in the
Here
world.
we are. We're in the Americas, but we're in South America, and there we see that beautiful mountain range that separates the long country of Chile from Argentina. We're talking, 3,000 miles long for Chile. We are at a winery that's actually in the Limari Valley that is located in Coquimbo, which, along with Atacama, we're talking, the Dios in the northern part of the country, they're desert, right? Very dry, very hot, but you have the beloved Pacific influence. And especially when you're talking about the Limari Valley, and as it scooches closer to the coast, you have significant influence from Pacific, keeping it cool. And in this particular case, that's a beautiful map on the right. It's very easy to see. The vineyards actually are within hailing distance of the coast, and they are riddled with limestone, big time. So granite, limestone, and clay, very classic conditions, including the cooling influence of the Pacific, to produce this wine, which is New World, but Madeline, all that minerality, son of a gun, where did that come from? And I think that this is a teaching example of how a New World wine can absolutely show that thumbprint of minerality, and hopefully won't confuse us too much, but it's an option. And we have a Chilean Chardonnay. So, that little whisper of grapefruit also isn't always a slam dunk for Sauvignon Blanc. This has a little bottle age on it. It's a 2019 actually, though we considered 18 as well. Coquimbo is the DO. The district within that is the Limari Valley. And this is the Tabali winery and a cuvee that they refer to as Talinay, which I believe is the name of the vineyard. And this is an area that actually was established in the early 2000s. And this was one of the very first wineries that showed the quality potential of this area, particularly for Chardonnay. I'm wildly impressed with the quality of this, I would have been way off too, had I been tasting it blind because of that aggressive minerality. But in terms of its oak treatment, by the way, it has been barrel fermented fully, but in older barrique. They do use native yeast, which, as we all know, and can we go to the next slide? Will give a sense of depth and style to the wine. I love this. This reminds me of, anybody been to Salta? It's high desert and you have a vineyard next to a cactus, right? So here we are showing the hills, though in this particular case, the vineyards are scooched closer to the Pacific. So you do have slopes, but they're gentle. And you're not in the foothills of the Andes per se. This is a winery actually that sources vineyards in other areas as well. And their lead guy, Felipe Mueller, who I believe is on the next slide, is one of their 2 winemakers, but also their managing director. Very young guy. He's in his early 40s. But he's somewhat of a mastermind in that he's plotting their global approach. And this is an exclusive family winery. This is not owned by a big company, but I think it's a wonderful example of a new world Chardonnay that is showing the thumbprint of a very specific growing region, particular to the country, and giving us all a little bit of a verklempt or oh boy moment because of the stoniness. It is so long, I still feel it and I still taste it. What else to? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Maddie. There's just so many. There's so many comments on chat that I want to make sure that we get to them. I felt like I could hear minds blowing across, including my own. You know, even though we do so many kits, and I should know what's in this kit, I try to come to this tasting blind today, and you've got this confusion of like, I was trying to rack my brain, and when you're blind tasting, you're looking for outside clues. I can't help myself. I go, did Evan really put a Chardonnay in the first as wine number 1? Because we don't often do that. So questions. Number 1, surprising, lots of way off comments. Was this a straightforward Chardonnay? And actually before that, I think you said because it's coastal, we consider this Le Marais to be a cool climate, correct?
Well, no, I mean, and Evan can speak to this more intimately than I can, but give me a shot at this for a second, Evan. We are in, you know, an area that's extremely dry and for the most part warm. But the Le Marais Valley, thanks to the Le Marais River and its proximity to the Pacific, is big time influenced by, you know, the winds coming in from the coast, and they're relatively strong winds. So the temperature is moderated. You know, that acidity is utterly natural, you know, and also don't forget, the limestone soil is punching up the perception of that as well. And I will tell all of you that are kicking yourself or biting your lip because you said Albarino with confidence, you know, I quite understand it, because remember, the second thing I said was the florality, fresh lime and lemon blossoms, you know, that comes through. And one look, you know, there's a part of you going, oh, great, lots of flowers. Albarino is a definite consideration.
Yeah,
So,
I would just add, though, that if you take a look at that, how many of you stopped tasting this wine about maybe 2 or 3 minutes ago and you can still taste it? You know, Albarino doesn't have that expansion. It doesn't have that complexity. It doesn't have that peacock's tail that this wine is still giving you minutes later. It doesn't obviously have the green pyrozenic characters of Sauvignon Blanc or the pungency of it, particularly if you were in this part of the world. And although it certainly has an old world sensibility about it, process of elimination. And again, I think the biggest giveaway here is one, there is I mean, not that Albarino can't be creamy and smooth, but there is, in spite of the shrill acid, and I will give you that this wine is shrill, to say the least, there is a roundness to it and a penetration, and most importantly, that expansion and the complexity of that expansion, which to me, again, you don't have, you know, sometimes you have to step back and think about a wine as you go through your deductive reasoning to actually get there. And this wine to me gets there not so much by virtue of the attack, but by virtue of the finish.
and you know, frankly, and I'll nudge us on to wine number 2, Limang. I want one parting shot on this wine, and God bless you, Tim, for, you know, communicating in the chat room. Don't forget to read Tim's responses. That I think, just to take a little bit of the stress out of this, aka how in God's name am I ever going to nail, you know, Le Marais Valley Chardonnay. This isn't about nailing this wine. This is about opening our eyes and our minds to the quality potential of this unique growing region. This is revelatory for me. So I'm not particularly worried about getting it or not. And I actually, frankly, between us chickens, made the comment to Evan and Tim before you got on, oh, beloved guests and attendees, that this was not an easy varietal nail, but it sure was a beautiful wine. So fair enough.
Fair enough. Nor is it, nor, by the way, are we always putting wines on the kits that are supposed to be nailed and used for Jedi Knights in training. It is about expansion of your thinking, challenging your traditional thing and expanding your palate and showing you that you're actually able to make Chardonnay of this genre in a place that you might not expect it from.
Although we're not trying to trick anybody.
No.
Chardonnay from Chile is benchmark. It's not, you cannot, don't think that, obviously Chile makes Chardonnay. We do have one question, Evan. I just want you to have a quick answer on this one. High acidity Chardonnay. Is Chile known for that?
In the very extremes of the country, absolutely. In the far north, as well as in the far south. As you approach Chiloé and you're in Osorno, Austral, and all those areas, those wines are equally, dare I say, shrill. So it's really in the middle of the country, in the central valleys and the Serrano Interior, Mali, Tata, Biobío, where you might not get as sharpness, but you'll still get there. Again, the racing cars are in the extremes, the Volvos are in the middle of the country. So,
Awesome.
All right, let's move on to wine number 2. If you look at this wine, right off the bat, you're probably going to say, Evan, in all of the kits, if those of you have been with us for a long time, you've never seen a wine like this. For those of you who are new, you're probably looking at this and going, I'm a little bit confused here. But this wine is a little bit, again, of a push, but also I think it'll make sense when we actually get there. The first question here, I think, what is the relative age of the wine? Is it young, or is it evolving, or is it old? Is something that you can certainly get a clue to by looking at the wine. And this wine, in fact, is moving more towards an amber color, or a more of a deeper, even, I don't say coppery color, but an amber or a brownish color than it is sort of the youthful brightness of the wine you had before. Madeline's sort of very strawish, pushing light yellowish color wine, and this wine share very, very little in common. Then as you go ahead and smell this wine, right off the bat, you're like, whoa, this is very different. I haven't had something like this when you think about, for lack of a better word, standard table wines that we drink before. So as far as the fruit, earth, and wood elements go, let's go ahead and take them side by side. First of all of that so-called freshness of fruit, the lemons that Madeline was talking about, the green apples that she was talking about here, are probably not as reflected here. I'm getting a citrusy character, but it's perhaps more from the zest or the pith, or the skin of the fruit. I'm getting stone fruit here, but rather than Madeline's sort of underripe stone fruit she talked about before, perhaps peaches and nectarines, I'm getting more like dried apricots or dried type characters in here. Again, sort of very much back notes to it, and maybe a little bit of tangerine, or tangerine, again, peel or zest, but once again, dried, confit, along those lines, and not sort of like fresh, crack it open and bite it type thing like that. However, I would say the fruit really isn't the big driver here. I'm certainly getting some earthy elements here. And once again, I'm getting sort of a chalky salinity and minerality. I want you to actually try and connect the dots between wine 1 and wine 2, because I actually believe they share that earthiness element in common. But the third element that I'm getting here has everything to do not so much with the grape, not so much with the style, but probably having to do with the winemaking style. And this wine has definitively, as one suggested by the color, but also echoed by the nose, and ultimately when you get it in the palate, stronger elements of long-term aging, oxidative aging. The wine's starting to pick up more of a sherry or a madderized type character to it that suggests the wine has been spending a long time before it comes to you. And then as I taste the wine, yes, from a flavor standpoint, before we get to the structure of everything that we talked about before, but I'm also here picking up much more distinctiveness of what I would call the oxidative or nuttier elements of the wine here. So here you're getting sort of a very albeit dry, but nevertheless sort of caramelly thing, but dry caramel. You could actually have caramel, but took the sugar away. I'm also getting nuts. I'm getting everything from pecan and peanut brittle, again, dry, not sweet, but nevertheless that same element of sort of torrefied nuttiness to it. I am picking up all sorts of elements of toasted nuts, toasted almonds, toasted peanuts, toasted things like that. And again, dry. So as we get to the structural elements, wine is dry. I would argue bone dry, which is not necessarily what I was expecting when I smelled it. The wine has, again, a very strong acidity element to it. There's a sharpness, there's a pucker, there's a salivation that goes on here. But the other thing that I'm really noticing right off the bat here is weight, is warmth, is my chest cavity feels like I'm a jack-o'-lantern right now. It's burning up inside relative to certainly wine one. Would I call this, a 25% alcohol, boom, boom, boom thing? No, but I'm definitely feeling it. So that's obviously part and parcel of the personality of the wine. It is long. It is once again expansive, but there's definitely something different about this wine that takes me out of the standard operating procedure of it's a Chardonnay, it's a Sauvignon Blanc, or whatever. So I want you to think about that as we start to look at where we're going to be. So would you bring up the poll, Li Meng, and see what we have? We got a couple of choices here. So right off the bat, in terms of grape varieties, you're probably sitting here going, not the usual suspects. So Palomino is a grape that's known in certain parts of the world for making fortified wines. It's known in Portugal, actually, as another grape called Purum. You might have seen it before in the Alentejo, Purrum. The Spanish actually call it Listan, as opposed to like Listan Prieto, which would be the black version of it. Listan would be the white version of it, which is that. Muscat is a very aromatic grape, can be made into super dry wines too. And actually, if we want to go there, into fortified wines too. In Portugal, you could be going red, you could be going white, you could be going blended. You could literally be in the Alentejo with your Purum or a number of other things. And again, you could make wines in either a fortified or non-fortified nature. So this is a wine that is not necessarily something that you're going to see every day, but it's a wine style that is classic around the world, as we'll talk about it before. And again, making those appropriate arguments to you across the board. So again, Portugal, Spain, regardless of there, South Africa and Australia, tip of the hat to the Muscat and perhaps even the sherry styled wines.
Awesome. Well, I'll tell you what, I think there's a little less confusion. Maybe this one was a little bit more straightforward because of the how unique it is. So we have results of Palomino at about 63%, Muscat at 25%, and then Portuguese blend. But again, firmly, I think in the old world, we've got a 25% on South Africa, maybe because it's unique. Any comments here, Evan, before we go into the answer? We could go straight.
No. I mean, I think pay attention to as you think about your own experiences and your own theoretical base, winemaking style, and what we talked about before is the heavily use of oxidative approach towards the winemaking. And while those can be used across the board, a couple of those, particularly when made in that style, tend to preserve the sweeter element and not so much the drier element, whereas this wine is absolutely unequivocally bone dry.
So we're going to leave Chile.
We're going to leave Chile, and we're getting up on our plane, and we're up in the air. We're at 30,000 feet, and we're hopping out of there. And the plane leaves, and the plane is actually going to go back across the equator, back across into the area of Europe, and specifically into Spain, and into the area of Andalusia in the southern part of Spain, where you're known for, number one, where tapas are from originally. People don't always think about that, but they were started in this part of the world. And most importantly, where sherry comes from, because in fact, this wine comes from an area of Spain called Jerez, or Jerez de la Frontera, which is known in Andalusia along the southern coastal area as being the homeland to the not only identity of a very distinctive style of fortified wine, we'll get to fortification in a moment, that exists there, but also providing a blueprint for other people to make sherry-like wines around the world. Now, sherry is a term which, aside from a handful of folks that have been grandfathered in, is now increasingly only associated with the DO of sherry itself, very much like all champagne is sparkling wine, but not all sparkling wine is champagne. Most all sherry is fortified wine, but not all fortified wine is sherry because it doesn't come specifically from Jerez. It is, in fact, 100% Palomino. If we can move to the next slide, Limang. We talk specifically about what this wine is. This wine is made by our friends at González Bias, one of the great sherry houses of Spain, one that's been around since literally the 1830s, I should say. Sorry about that. And along with, Lustau and a couple of the other great brands that are out there, Harvey's, et cetera, over years, has been a great producer there. The wine is an Amontillado Seco. So I want you to point out that Seco term because a lot of you are thinking Amontillado, and you're probably thinking of Amontillados that are either A, actually sweet, because those are made in a commercial style, or B, that are made in a nuttier, more oxidative style because they use wines that do not have as much flora on them. This wine itself is an Amontillado Seco. It's a 12-year-old cuvee, if you will. The wine spent its first 4 years under flor. Now, flor is when the sherry barrels, the butts, as you'll see in an upcoming photograph here, are filled. They're not filled all the way full. Those are 600-liter sherry butts, B-U-T-T-S, or pipes, and they're filled roughly about 2/3 plus of the way. And depending on the barrel, and this is what's unique about sherry, some of them nothing will happen to, and the wines will just gradually age over time. And those wines will become olorosos and darker styles, oftentimes sweetened to become commercial Amontillados. But on a number of them, they will develop this element called flor. And flor is a type of yeast that literally builds and sits almost like a spongy, very thin film on the top of the sherry and prevents oxygen from contacting the sherry until over time it is broken down by literally the wine and the enzymic reactions, so it sort of goes away. Flor can live upwards to about 4+ years or less than that, depending on how healthy it is and what it is. The youngest ones that never lose their flora, if you will, are the wines that become finos, or the fino style, the manzanilla style, if you're coming specifically from Sanlúcar de Barrameda. And as it dies out over time and you continue to age it, which this wine does, those wines can become gradually what you would call an aged fino or an Amontillado Seco, depending on however you want to label it. These people here choose to leave it as an Amontillado Seco because they leave it for an additional 8 years without flor to continue its oxidative process. So it is once a wine. It's basically a glorified, those of you familiar with González Bias, producers of Tío Pepe, the most popular and one of the most delicious dry sherries in the world. This is basically aged Tío Pepe. And the wine gives you all of the elements here. And here's a picture of the great Antonio Flores. Antonio Flores is the master wine blender. He's been there literally since 1980. His father was the production director at González Bias, so he literally grew up at the winery and has been in charge of winemaking for close to 40 years now, and does just an exquisite job in making this wine. And yeah, it's pretty interesting. The alcohol level here has been fortified up, which is to say wines coming from Jerez and Madeira are fortified after fermentation, whereas wines coming from Sicily, namely the production of Marsala and port, are fortified during the process of at which point in time fermentation is arrested and the residual sugars that are kept there are left in the wine, which is why ports are most often sweet. And then the sherries that are sweet have sweetened wine and color wine added to them, both usually made out of a grape called Pedro Jimenez, to bring those additional wines there. Palomino is always vinified by itself dry. And this wine is fortified upwards to 15.5%, probably started its life at somewhere closer to 10 or 11, and the additional alcohol there, distillate, the aguardiente, brings it up to a higher degree of fortification. But nevertheless, 15.5, if you think about it, that's lower in alcohol than a lot of wine coming out of other parts of the New World, namely reds, Zinfandels and other grapes that are, pushing 16%. So a lot of people enjoy sherry styles like this at table with food. They're among some of the most amazing gastronomic wines in the world. They are underappreciated, undervalued, and misunderstood in the world of wines. People think about them almost as a separate category, but they are in the end wine.
And if you are new to us, know that the sleeve comes off, so you don't need to log into our uh, uh, online to be able to see the back label information. This has to be here from a federal standpoint, and you can see actually this alcohol is also posted on the back of this label.
Yeah, 15.5 for a fortified wine would be considered, by the way, lightly fortified. Ports and stuff like that are generally fortified to closer to 20-ish% here. And just for those of you who are curious about that, if you could go back one slide, actually 2 slides for a minute, Limang. The AB on the label, Viña AB. Viña literally means vineyard. And AB stands for Andres Botayun, whose vineyard this was. There's a gentleman named Andres Botayun who owned the primary vineyard from which this wine is sourced. And hence it's his homage to him done by Gonzalez Bias, and not to be confused with another wine simply called Botayun that is made by Lestal, which comes from the same vineyard.
I think that these were two very interesting white wines to start. I just want to say again, for those of you who are learning, we're all learning at the same time. For me, this may be a difficult start for some of you. It's okay. I think that it will be a fun discovery, and you're here to discover with us.
Once again, the goal here is not to nail all the wines, but to educate, expand your palate, expand your thinking.
And thanks, Tim, for answering those questions. I think that there are lots of technical bits that are being questioned on the different types of sherry, and hopefully what Tim is explaining makes it very clear when you're able to read through that as well. Thanks, Tim.
Sure. Yeah, sherry's complicated. And Evan and I were talking before we started filming that it's really one place in the wine world where you have to go there to understand the wines. Because, you know, in the United States, we see a fraction of sherry wines. And there's a lot to the industry. How the wines are made is very complex. How they're aged is complex. And it's worth going there. Yeah.
We're plotting a field trip. Yep.
Field trip.
In answering
Yeah.
the questions about sherry, how would you tell apart an Amontillado and Oloroso in your mind?
Yeah, well, that's actually pretty simple. If you think about, you know, in my answer to the right, if you get a chance to read it, there's 2 huge families of sherry, 2 styles. One is Fino that Evan alluded to, and then there's Oloroso. So the Finos are much fresher. They're lighter in color. They're only 15.5% alcohol and very fresh, and they are bottled and meant to be consumed. Olorosos are those, and Evan mentioned flora, which is the yeast that grows on the surface of the wine. The barrels are not topped up. And flora always grows when you have Fino or Manzanilla, the lighter style. And if it stops growing or it never grows, the wines are reclassified as Olorosos. They're refortified to 18% or more, depending on the house. And then they're aged for any number of years. And most Olorosos are dry, but some of them are sweet. They're much darker in color. They're much richer, and they're just much more oxidized wines, you know, totally different style. So, yeah,
Hopefully
I hope that
helps.
sheds some light.
I
Like I said, it's complicated. Then Kat asked a really good question is, what is the smell of sherry? And it's aldehydes. And aldehydes is literally oxidized alcohol. And aldehyde smells like old peanut shells or old roasted nuts, old pistachios, something like that. Okay, so I know we got to move on. So let's go.
I'm putting the colors for those who don't have the wine. The next 4 wines have very rich colors, and I will show
Yes,
them one
they
at a
do.
time as well.
But they couldn't be more different, which points out the fact that color is a good indicator sometimes. All right, so let's start with wine number 3. And everybody, as you hold your glass over a white background, you can see the wine is very deep. You can't read through the glass, your notes underneath. We'll call it a very deep ruby. It lightens up the very edge to kind of a dark pink, magenta, something like that. The wine stains the glass a little bit. And then the legs, tears, viscosity, et cetera, are, if you wait for it, you gotta wait for it, they're high. Huh. Interesting. Okay, so we've got a wine that's pretty rich. may be fairly alcoholic. We're going to find out. On the nose, starting with the fruit, it's kind of a mix of red fruits and dark fruits by category. The red fruits, things like plums, cherries, strawberries, and the condition is fresh and ripe, and in some cases very ripe. There's also darker black fruits, black cherry, black plum, black raspberry maybe. And once again, the condition, like the red fruit, is fresh and ripe. And I think in the case of the black fruit, yeah, ripe to almost overripe. If you smell the wine again, take your nose slightly out of the glass. Yeah, there's flowers. Red wines are often floral. This one to me is roses, also maybe a touch of lavender. In terms of non-fruit, there's some leafy green vegetables. There's some anise, black licorice, mushrooms, herbal. The wine is really, to me, quite herbal, and these are savory herbs like oregano and bay leaf, and maybe a little dried basil. Spices, I mentioned the licorice, maybe a little paprika. And then in terms of earth and mineral, it's predominantly earthy. There's truffle and mushrooms, there's turned soil, forest floor. On the palate, it's just a little bit mineral, but it's predominantly earthy in that category. So again, that's important to note, because you've got all that fruit and you've got the flowers and the herbs, etc. But earth is an important component here. In terms of oak aging, yes, it's mixed, mostly used oak, but there is definitely a presence of spice, touch of vanilla. It's kind of a coffee bean, bitter chocolate thing to it. And that oak aging adds a little bit of oxidation to the wine. And that takes the form of kind of some hazelnut or pecan or something like that. Okay, so as your attorney, I advise you to taste the wine again to calibrate the structure. I always wait 3 to 5 seconds afterwards. Wow. Okay, so the first thing that occurs to me, and you may have picked this up on the nose, I did immediately, is that alcohol is elevated. Alcohol is probably 14.5 to 15%. It's ripe, and that explains, by the way, the really ripe elements of fruit, especially the dark fruit. The acid, though, is still naturally high, and notice that your salivary glands are working, right? This wine is more acidic than the sherry, right? Which is curious, right? The tannin, though, to me, it's interesting because we've got elevated alcohol, medium plus acid, and the tannin is only medium. Very curious for a red wine with this much depth of color. The texture is round and smooth, very pleasant. This wine would be delicious, out back by the pool, if you can pull that off. And the finish is long, and complexity is medium plus. I think it's a delightful wine. So again, at this point, Lee Mang, I guess we should offer up the choices. So here are your choices. And those are 3 very curious grapes to consider. We have Barbera, we have Pinot Noir, and we have Gamay. And then, of course, we've got the usual split between Old World and New World places. Barbera, of course, from Italy. Pinot Noir could be either Old or New World. And Gamay, in its classic example, would be, of course, France and Beaujolais. Okay. So, Lee Mang, should we discuss differences now, or the process of elimination now, or later?
I think that let's give people about, somehow it just ended without me touching anything. So I'm going to, because that's because 100% of people answered, which is pretty cruel. Here we go. We have 64% of folks who are in Barbera and 18% of folks who are in Gamay. So there's a very clear winner here. I think that we've done this a number of times where we've put these 3 grapes against each other, especially in position number 3 and number 4. So it might be helpful to kind of point in one direction before we go to the next page.
Okay, so we're going to start, the grape varieties, we're going to start at the bottom and go up. So if this is a classic example of Gamay, France, Burgundy, you're thinking Beaujolais Village, which usually means carbonic maceration and stem inclusion, and you don't have either here. With this depth of color, it would probably be Beaujolais Cru, where you might find a little bit of carbonic or whole cluster-like treatment, very tutti fruity, etc. but you don't have that here. Moving on to Pinot Noir, this wine is kind of like bordering on purple. So Pinot Noir, unless it's Pinot Noir and steroids, in which case something has been added, you don't get this color. You just don't. Okay, so that's one time where color matters. All right, finally, by process of elimination, yeah, we're in Barbera land. And the mix of predominantly dark fruit with red fruit with the acid, the high acid, then the herbal qualities. And, Madeline and I were talking earlier today that, Barbera, it's the most widely planted grape in Piedmont, Northwest Italy. And there are different styles of it. There's old school where you're using old wood, kind of oxidative. And then there's a new school, which is very clean, fresh, bright, stainless steel, no wood. And then there's kind of a quasi designer style. And this almost could be considered this because this is done in a little used and new barrique. So there's some new qualities to it. Also really high quality fruit here. Okay.
And Barbera deserves more love and attention.
Yes, absolutely. It's one of my favorite everyday drinking red wines by far. Yeah. So we're going to get into the magic bus. And we're going to go from Jerez all the way into the beautiful hilly country of Piedmont and Barbaresco. And this is where the winery is, Castello di Neve. And this, the original estate, it's Italy, which means the place is old. The original estate, the Castello, goes back to 1735. The owners now are the Stupino family, and Giacomo Stupino and his family purchased the Castello and the property, which is about 150 acres near Barbaresco in 1964. And so now several generations of the Stupino family have really built up to the estate. And Neve is known for Barbaresco, and they make wine from two of the top crus, those being Galena and Santo Stefano, single vineyards. But of course, Barbera is their cash cow. They make a lot of it. It's delicious stuff. And this to me is one of the best examples of a modern style of Barbera. So this is a good wine for you to benchmark. And also, I hope you can see it's delicious. I will say the only thing that makes it atypical is the alcohol level. Okay. Barbera usually is 13.5 or 14%. So this is an anomaly. And I think that is the 2019 vintage in Piedmont generally. Okay.
2019 across Europe.
Yeah. And my distinguished colleagues, what do you think? What would you add?
Maddie, go ahead. No.
I just think it's a wonderful example of Barbera because of that poignant acidity. Someone's commenting on the tannins that it seemed a little grippy to them. And to me, you may have like a low tolerance for tannin. I would say there certainly is tannin, but it's if it is considerable, it's softer tannins, but it's very mouth-watering. And I think there is wood spice, but it's very integrated. And Tim or Evan, you might answer this. The question is, the spice, is it typical, and is it what is it derived from? And I would say that it's in the grape variety, but also it may be somewhat wood derived as well. I think you can serve this wine absolutely as an alternative to or in tandem with the Pinot Noir to people who enjoy this kind of mouthfeel.
Yeah, and I just made the comment, Kathy, is that, again, first red wine of a flight, and it may seem really tannic to you,
Right.
but if you wait to the end of the flight, I think you'll be able to calibrate the tannin in this wine exactly where it should be.
Yeah,
And Tim, we have a question here also about the spiciness. Is this amount of spice typical?
Kat, I'm not sure what you mean by spice. Spice can either be oak spice or it can be pepper spice. And I think you mean by oak spice, in which case, it's not typical unless, of course, the wine has this much oak. So I think the spice here is not, germane to the grape variety. It's germane to the oak.
Yeah, and the tannins here, I was just going to add that while they're present, they're not astringent. They're more fuzzy than they are
Mean.
hard, and and certainly not mean if you were looking at another grape variety. And while they're not perhaps as transparent as adjacent dolcettas would be from the same region, nevertheless, I think as Tim alluded to, as we move through the flight here, we'll get a better sense of calibrating the tannins appropriately.
Okay, now to wine 4, and is something completely different.
I'm going to just show through the pictures of this beautiful
Oh,
area.
yeah, we got to look at the pictures.
Can we see the label again,
beautiful.
quick?
Absolutely.
Just because it's good to have a visual of the label.
Tim, can you
is-
explain what superiore meant? Because that's a term you're going to see not just on Barbera,
Right,
but you'll see it in
right,
other
Evan.
places.
Evan, you asked a short question with a long answer. Okay, I have to be Inigo Montoya and sum up. Italian wine law is all about aging and places. So it's very similar to the AOC law in France, but in addition, for everything, there are aging requirements, or there are aging requirements and additional alcohol percentage requirements. In this case, it's kind of both. So there is Barbera, DOC, there's Barbera Superiore, which has to be 0.5% higher in alcohol. I think it's like, believe it or not, 11.5 versus 12%. And there has to be an additional period of time with aging. And in this case, I think it's 6 months or 9 months. But that's usually what it means. So in many, appellations throughout Italy, you will see this, where you'll have something, a place name, and then a place name with superiority. And
But
that's
it
what
has nothing to do with quality. I think that's the most
No.
important point to bring
No.
out
Right.
here. It's not superior.
Right.
right.
Castello.
It's kind of like how we use the term reserve in the United States. Sorry. And there we are. There are Giulio and Italia
The
Stupino,
Stupinos.
distinguished gentlemen. Yes. And just thinking that, again, this castle built in like the 18th century. It's extraordinary,
Right. And I also want to answer Jerry. Jerry, you'll see that on our webinars, and it could be the last two because we had problems with our polls. We didn't do this, but we always have an other option, because during the webinar, we do let people throw in what else they thought of, so that we can explain why it isn't, that particular wine in other. Otherwise, on our website, there are always only 4 options, and not having an other as an option. All right, Tim, wine number 4.
All right, everybody, let's go on to wine number 4. And as you're holding a glass over white background, not quite as much depth of color as wine 3. The wine is still a very deep ruby. It lightens up to a youthful, pink or very light ruby rim. A little bit of gradation in the color, a tiny bit of staining, not much. And then as we swirl the glass, so you can just rotate it slowly. Again, if we compare it to the previous wine, there's less richness. The legs or tiers, whatever you want to call them, a little bit thinner. They're moving a little bit faster. That would lead us to believe, we think, the wine's a little bit lower in alcohol. We're going to find out pretty quick. All right, on the nose, go ahead and smell it, please. Okay, so like the previous wine, it's a mix of red and dark fruit. And the red fruit to me is tartar. It's things along of really sour cherries and raspberries and cranberries. And it is fresh and tart. Touch ripe, but it's mostly fresh and tart. The black fruit is pretty much the same. It's black raspberries and blackberries, and maybe underripe black plums, but it is all fresh, just barely ripe, and tart. There's definitely some floral notes above the glass. This time, I think more lavender, touch of rose maybe. There's green vegetal elements. Leafy greens, kind of like arugula, things like that. Maybe a little green and black olives, mushrooms, and then other spices, black pepper, definitely. I think that's important for this wine, maybe even some white pepper. And then in terms of earth and mineral, well, there's a touch of earth here, but again, everybody, this is one of the times where, as your attorney, go back and smell the previous wine, and then come back to wine 4. By comparison, wine 4 is not nearly as earthy. Okay. What else about it? One more thing, and that I think it's important for this wine in terms of its varietal marker. There is a smoky, almost bacony, smoked meat, sanguine quality to the wine. That's important here. Oak aging, yes, but it's really low intensity. It's blended oak, and to me, where that comes across, there's a toastiness on the nose, and then maybe kind of an oxidative walnut or bitter pistachio note. Okay, let's taste it for structure. Again, wait 3 to 5 seconds. All right. So we've already got a red wine to calibrate against this particular wine. What's different? And something is radically different. And that thing is the alcohol. alcohol is much lower. Probably here it's 13.5%, not even 14. Meaning what? Could be a much cooler climate or a wine that where the fruit was picked early, but my bet is on a cooler climate. Acid, as a result of grapes not getting that ripe, is elevated. It's higher than the last wine, okay? And the tannin, for me, medium plus. At the same time, it's gritty. And I think that's the acid really pushing the tannin, because the wine is really not big enough to give you huge tannins, but it's definitely a little gritty and astringent on the finish. The finish to me is medium plus, little beyond medium plus, and the complexity is medium plus. Okay, right, that's quite a bit of information to work with, but I think I gave some very salient clues in terms of the grape variety. But let's see. Here are your choices. All right, we have Pinot Noir, we have Gamay, and we have Syrah. And then, of course, we have the usual old world and new world breakdowns with some possible countries. Okay, so everybody just take a look, vote for your favorites, only vote once. And then we can talk about process of elimination, and we can also talk about important markers / impact compounds for each of those wines. Okay, Li Ming, what do you think?
I think it's certainly helpful when you have put with 3 options of varieties and an other in front of you, because sometimes, I don't know for everybody else, but sometimes when you're looking at choices and you have 17 or so, I think, red grapes on our grid, it's a lot to pick from. It is a lot more helpful
Yeah.
when you see you're trying to boil down. So I wonder if there's a good process, Tim, for process of elimination, even in your brain, to get down to 3 or 4, so that you've
Oh, yeah.
got you're creating yourself a 25%, 33% chance of getting it right.
Sure, that's a great question. And, the answer is yes, and they have to do with 2 different things. For white wines, it's really the use of oak or not, okay? And the problem is that the unoaked white wines is a huge group, but the oak wines is actually a very small group in terms of classic examples. Red wines, that has to do really with the pigmentation. If you've got wines with much lighter color, that's a whole group, as opposed to wines with much deeper color, more heavily pigmented. So those are the 2 distinctions that I would make, at least start with.
Great. All right, I'm gonna just give another 5 seconds. If you haven't picked, remember, we don't see your answer. So
You
go
know,
ahead.
on the tail end of what Tim said, while you're waiting a few seconds, that's where color really comes into play, especially if you're utterly stymied and you're going, I don't have a clue. Going back to the
Yeah.
color will often set you free, because they're big strokes in terms of opaque, translucent, and showing gradation of color or not, that will go, can't be that, might be that.
Yep.
Yep.
All right. I'm sorry if I closed it before you decided to answer, but here's where we are.
Survey said,
75% of people are in Syrah land, and
Yep.
there is still some confusion. I mean, between
Okay.
that 25% there.
All right, we will sort out the confusion presently. Let's start with the grape variety. So everybody went to Syrah. I'm glad you did. And the important markers in what I call impact compounds. For me, when I said black pepper, that's one. All the savory, sanguine, dried meat, beef jerky, bacon things, that's Syrah. Those 2 things together usually equal Syrah. So good on that. Gamay, once again, with this kind of color, we'd expect Beaujolais Village, which means carbonic maceration and stem inclusion, neither here. And then finally, Pinot Noir, this has too much color and the tannins are too astringent, and Pinot Noir doesn't smell like bacon unless you happen to be drinking it and cooking it at the same time.
Or you're in a fire year. There were some out there. There are some out there.
There you go. There you go. All right. Those of you that were, dead set, you were going to the Northern Rhone. All right. So now your assignment, and do it right now, is to go back and taste the Barbera, because we have a wine there that's profoundly earthy, and this wine, which is not so earthy. So everybody do that. I'm going to do it too.
Very helpful.
Okay. That is to say, the middle of the Barbera, the middle of the wine between the fruit and all the structure, is predominantly earthy, and it's pretty pronounced. As opposed to the Syrah, where the middle of the wine is all about the sanguine and spicy bacon and peppery stuff, but there's un poquito earthiness there. There is some there, but it's just not that much to take you to the old world. Okay, so let's see where we are.
Super exciting.
We're gonna leave Barbaresco very sadly, and we're going to someplace entirely different.
And far,
In
far
fact,
away.
Evan, is this a first for a kit? I think it is.
This is the first in an MTW kit. Yeah, very exciting.
Yeah. So we are in British Columbia in the Okanagan Valley, a place, by the way, that, you know, if all you Jedi Knights know, there's 6 new GIs as of last week or week before. This is Director's Cut. Winemaker's name's Michael Mosny, who's originally from Slovakia. And for many years up in Okanagan Valley, he was making wine for other people and then decided to make wine for himself. What I find interesting about this particular wine is that, so I'm a trained musician, I have 2 degrees in music. That was many lifetimes ago. So, but Michael also, I don't know if he's a musician, but he and his wife actually play music in the vineyards. So he plays Mozart and Bach, which are my 2 favorite composers. And he swears on some kind of scientific evidence that plants grow better with classical music. Now, I don't know about that. I think it sounds like a really cool idea. I want you to know, I tried an experiment, you'll love this, in junior high where I played music. I played Led Zeppelin and Mozart to plants, but I forgot to water them, so they all died. So that's when I knew I would never be a scientist.
No, you can't blame Zeppelin.
I went to my mom.
You can't blame
Right, I went to my
Zeppelin.
mom. I said, "Mom, the plants all died." And she goes, "Did you water them?" And I said, okay. So anyway, so we are in the Okanagan Valley. So sorry for that sidebar.
I love it.
Definitely the Syrah here. And to me, very classic cooler type Syrah in that's peppery. The red fruit dominates on the nose and palate. It's very tart. It's very lifted. It's got all those savory, wonderful qualities you get in Syrah, and the acid is really lifted and the alcohol is restrained. So wonderful stuff. And to me, just thrilling to see another great cooler climate Syrah from British Columbia. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was up in British Columbia and actually in Canada, I should say. I was actually in Niagara not that long ago, judging at the Canadian National Wine Competition. And we tasted, you know, some, not me personally, but as a group, we tasted like 1,300 wines over the span of 4 days. And, you know, you start to see clear patterns emerging. And although certainly led by British Columbia and specifically the Okanagan and Similkameen valleys, Similkameen being adjacent to Okanagan, even in Niagara, there are some really good Syrahs being made. And as a red wine variety, along with Pinot Noir, it's really attune yourself to as you begin to study that part of the world. And hopefully America's largest trading partner will figure out a way to get more wine down here. It still is an absolutely unfathomable reality that we don't get more Canadian wine to us than we can, but nevertheless, there's some really lovely examples. The wines at this point in time, for the good examples, I think this is a really good example, show restraint and great varietal correctness with all the markers, Tim, as you pointed out there, certainly in this variety. And for what it does with those varieties, it's also worth keeping your eyes on the prize with cool climate Chardonnay, with Riesling, and with sparkling wine too. So there you go.
Great.
There is
We're so
Michael.
excited to be showing this in our monthly kits, which we've never done Canada before. Jerry's got a cute comment for you, Tim, on chat, which I love that a lot of master sommeliers are also related, have jobs or past lives or current lives related with music. I think wine has a
Yeah.
lot to do with music.
Well,
too.
Jerry, you know, there's a lot of members in the court in the US and internationally who have liberal arts or performing arts degrees.
Theater.
So yeah, that's
Mhm.
true. In opera, I know that David Keck, who's in Houston, is a really fine singer.
Yeah.
And then, you know, several other musicians whom I'm thinking of. Rebecca Feineman
Yeah.
has a degree
yeah.
in music and played cello.
And-
Yeah. So yeah, there are some, and you know, we could talk about it. We don't have time, but there is a lot of that maps across from musical training to tasting wine. There's a lot. internally, what you
To
do.
reassure you, Jerry, no, you do not need a musical degree to get good at it.
No, in
Probably
fact,
need a
I
few more Master of the
strongly
World kits.
advise against getting a music degree.
Yeah, but a lot of drinking with Master of the World kits would probably help you get it.
Yes.
All right. So, Evan, wine number 5.
All right. Well, after our jaunt up in the great north, we're gonna move to something else. And right off the bat, if you look at this wine, of the first 3 reds that we have here, thus far, this one clearly has the most density of color, the most depth of color, the most opaqueness. And opaqueness can be defined literally as if you're holding this over a piece of paper, ideally maybe with some writing on it. If you can't see the writing through the glass, that is the definition of the word opaque. If you can see the writing, but the color is still deep, that's deeply colored. So always use opaque in the correct way. And if you swirl this wine around, whether you just roll it in the glass or you swirl it around, you'll notice that it leaves a very deep staining of color in the tiers of that, and hold on to it. Obviously, the deep staining just essentially reinforces or validates that really extracted deep color, deep pigmentation that this wine has, and that is probably in fact provided by the grapes. And it swirls down moderate plus in terms of the speed of the legs for those of you who care about that legging thing. Anyway, let's go ahead and smell it and ultimately taste it, because that's where all the fun is. And right off the bat, you'll get an interesting sort of juxtaposition of volume of fruit, but also volume of earth at the same period of time. And the fruit here comes off as sort of a very rich, deep, borderline brooding character of blue fruits, black fruits, not a lot of red fruit here. It really is, we always talk about that sort of juxtaposition, as Tim did, of the last 2 wines of red and black fruit. This wine shows very little red. Or if the red's there, it would be really overripe. And if it was really overripe, there'd be more of a jamminess to it, and you're not getting that here. So I would relegate this wine to the camp of blue fruit first, black fruit secondary, and then other elements of things that are organic. I'm picking up a little bit of fennel here. I'm definitely picking up floral elements to the wine. Once again, sort of a violety character, perhaps a soft lavender character, maybe even a rose character. Rose is sort of the wine equivalent of using lemon, because if you ever walk through a rose garden and you walk past all of the different roses, first of all, what you realize is you can say rose to every wine, because half the roses have no aroma. So you won't actually be wrong. I just wanted to point that out for you for the future. If everyone says rose, you're not going to do it. But most of the time we use rose, we use it in a more aromatic vein. But even between yellow roses, white roses, and deeply colored, deeply pigmented roses, the spectrum of florals do here. This is obviously in a deeper spectrum vein here, but perhaps led more by violet in this case. However, behind all of those elements, and then there's some herbal elements to it there. There's a little bit of a maybe even slightly garrigi or underbrushy character there. There's also earth. And the earth here comes off to me more as a sort of combination of some organic, so like sort of a turned dirt character, but almost flecked with stones or something like that. So there is a bit of a minerality there, but there's also sort of a sense of rich organic earth at the same time. And then as far as wood goes, I'm struggling. And if there is wood here, it's certainly of the larger, more neutral vein. If I was literally tasting this wine blind, and of course, unfortunately for all of y'all, I'm not, I would even suggest that there is an interesting element of texture being presented, which could suggest older oak, larger oak, but neutral oak, but also not oak. Maybe it was concrete. Maybe it was amphora. Maybe it was something like that that also provided an oxidative element, but not necessarily through wood. And then moving on, let's go to the palate quickly. The wine is rich, the wine is dry, but the wine is ripe. And it's important to note here that although the fruit is ripe, ripe fruit hits you on the very tip of your tongue and then sort of goes away and doesn't linger the way sugar would. So if you're always trying to find the difference between sort of ripe and sweet, how long it carries is going to be that. In this one case, you get a quick hit on your tongue and then it dissipates as it rolls towards the back. It is definitely fruit driven. It definitely has volume, weight, and texture to it. The texture is in fact round, but nevertheless, it has ample tannin. And clearly there is an intentional effort here to play back the tannins and polish them off, almost like they took a rock and threw it into a rock tumbler. You know, you can get those rock tumblers thing, and it polishes there, even though the rocks are ample. And I'm getting huge amounts of tannin, but not hard tannin, not astringent tannin, not drying tannin, just what I would call ample tannin. The wine has balanced acidity to it, but still enough to carry the flavors through. It carries through in a fairly long way, but it also carries itself in a very mono way. So right off the bat, I'm telling myself, this is probably not a blended wine. It's probably pure, whatever it is, and whatever that genre is. And again, I'm spending time looking at that deep pigmentation, the expression of black fruit, the ample tannins that I'm getting here, and the very strong florals. So as I think about what choices I have here, I've got Carmenere as a blend. I've got Malbec as a blend, Cabernet Sauvignon as a blend. And by the way, when we put /blend, that means that the wine could be 100% Carmenere or blended with Carmenere, 100% Cabernet or blended with Cabernet, ditto Malbec. So think about those. Malbec is known for being sort of the juiciest, most succulent, depending on where you are in the world, and it can be lean, mean, and hard in other places. Cabernet Sauvignon has this wonderful combination of pyrrhizinic characteristics coming from the Sauvignon Blanc parentage of the grape, as well as obviously the darker fruit characters. And Carmenere, by definition, sort of plays the two of them, but also has, just by definition, much greener character, so more like bell peppers, jalapenos, and pasillas, albeit in really well-made cases with a lot of deft fruit. And again, here you have to ask yourself, how much green is there versus the other elements? How much, acid and all those other things. So I would say that, and once again, throwing the countries around, remember that Italy is not just about Nebbiolo and Sangiovese. They grow some of these other grapes too. Australia and Chile, obviously, in the old part of the world, demonstrate those, and everywhere in between.
Wonderful. So I see about 50%. So I feel like there is a little bit of consternation here. Any extra hints, Evan, to help people out?
Well,
Um,
think
a
about
few more
the
seconds
things.
here.
Yeah, no, think about the things that we talked about. Think about the extract of color. Think about the fact that that an extract of color either speaks to a warm place or a very thick-skinned grape or a combination thereof. This wine has huge extract of color. Secondarily, both Cabernet and Carmenere tend to have more green elements to them. I'm not seeing a whiff of green here at all. If anything, I'm seeing a very fruit-dominant wine with earth as a subplot, and the green elements that are there, or the vegetable elements there, are softly herbal, but they tend to be more like fennel, fennel seed, and certain other types of green, but not so much that kind of hard green, and certainly not a pyrrhizinic green. And then ample tannin. This wine has a lot of tannin. It may not be hard tannin, but it has a lot of tannin.
Great. All right. So let's share the results of where people are at. We've got 60% on Malbec. We've got 30% on Carmenere and 10% there on Cabernet. And the old world, new world split is pretty much down the middle. I'd be interested to see what other could have been here. If you want to be brave and put your other into the chat, we can take a look at that.
Well, we have other terroir, we don't have other grapes. So that's an interesting thing. So maybe somebody's thinking, maybe I'm in a place, but I don't. Yeah, see Argentina, which would certainly speak to the Malbec call. But yeah, no, Argentina is not on the map. So that's a possibility too. You never know. One day we're going to pick other. People are going to be shocked, but we're going to do it.
Well, the point is to have the correct answer. Anyway.
That would just be mean, you know.
Oh, I know. It depends on the day
No,
of the
we would
week.
not be doing that.
All right, getting up,
let's go.
leaving Canada. Goodbye, British Columbia. Goodbye, Okanagan. We're upping up at 30,000 feet. We can see the Pacific Ocean there, and we're going eastward, and we're going back to the old world. This time we're going to the north of Spain. We're going to France. We're going down to the southwest in a part of the world that shares some commonality with Cabernet Sauvignon, but we're specifically going to the appellation of Cahors. And Cahors, for those people who know the great black wine, the black wine is known as Côte, or also known as Malbec. Malbec literally translates to bad mouth in French colloquial language, and the fact that you historically don't find ripe, smooth, creamy wines coming from that part of the world makes you probably pick New World over Old World. But those of you who are saying to yourself, I'm stuck in the middle, somewhere between the Old World and the New World, you're actually kind of right, because although this wine is a Cahors and is 100% Malbec and is from France, it is made with distinctive New World sensibility because crocus, and the word crocus literally speaks to the crocus flower, which is the same flower that makes saffron, which has actually been native to the area of Cahors since the 14th century. Not all saffron comes from the Middle East, but crocus is a joint venture project between Bernard Vigoureux, who has been in the business of making Cahors in his family. I say his family, not him. He's not that old. Since the 1880s, but in a joint venture with Paul Hobbs. Now, Paul Hobbs, as those of you know, is almost knee-jerk associated with Argentina and with helping change the face of Malbec from being something that was Malbec in that sort of richer, opulent style of wine that we've come to know coming out of Luján de Cuyo, coming out of even the Uco Valley these days, and points north and points south. So this is a really cool project. It started in 2007 and 2008 when the two of them sort of went back and forth. Paul went to Cahors to learn about what was going on there. Bernard went to Argentina to see what was going on there. And after some consulting services, Paul was so enamored with Cahors, where he hadn't really spent a lot of time, that they decided to do this joint venture project. So where you can tell Paul Hobbs' imprint is the following places. Number one, you have significant extract, right? So you've got big volume. This wine is made with very high density plantings of roughly 12.3 thousand vines per acre, which is quite dense, and pulling literally just 2.6 tons per acre, so low yields. But where his touch is felt is in the smoothness, the creaminess, the voluptuousness of the wine, while at the same time producing a wine that is big volume and that does have the undercurrent of earthiness and fennel and dare I add, sort of a fruity spiciness character that you find with Malbec, and where you don't see it as much in Bordeaux anymore, because it was at one point in time, if you follow Laura Catena and a number of other people, the most planted grape in Bordeaux. At one point in time, it never did that well, and when phylloxera hit and people could all replant, Malbec was pushed into a subsequent role of being a supportive actor. That's Bernard. Bertrand, I'm sorry, not Bernard, but Bertrand, on the left-hand side, and Paul Hobbs on the right-hand side. And this is yet another place where Paul is involved in the world. Many of you know he's a big person in Argentina, does a little bit of spot consulting in Chile, very spot, but he's also sort of rejuvenated the family efforts in the Finger Lakes in Long Island, and has projects going on in Armenia and all over the world. He's a very brilliant winemaker and a very nice guy, I would add too.
Awesome. Madeline, have you disappeared? There you are.
Your mute's on, Maddie.
I'm here, I'm sorry. I just had a moment where I was cracking myself up. I thought it was
I think
it
both you and I
was no
saw that.
reflection on what you were saying, Evan. So I decided to,
Yeah.
I love Venkat's comment. Thank you so much for that comment, Venkat. We are going to move to wine number 6. I should just remind everyone that at 2:30, we're going to stay on for a happy half hour. And amongst us is one of the winemakers. I'm not going to say a name, so I give no clue at all. But one of the winemakers, I hope you can stay for just a little bit more. I know it's late where you are. But hopefully you guys who stay for the happy half hour will get to meet this amazing person. In any case, wine number 6.
okay. And I will move this along at a steady clip. By the way, their 2:30 is our 5:30 Eastern, and I think it's Rio Rancho's 4th, well, any event.
3:30.
3:30. Okay.
There we go.
All righty then. So we've got wine number 6. I think you will find it very interesting. Don't drop them, but you can hold wine 5 and 6 together and look at them both against a white surface, because they are both opaque, but there is significant difference. between the two definitions of that. Wine number 5 has positively black tones in the center and lightens to a purple rim, correct? And stains the glass like a house on fire. And wine number 6, you know, you could almost see through it, but it's a true, very dark ruby red, and it lightens more to a rosy rim that's tinged with a little bit of yellow or even orange in it. It just shows, you know, and I'm in direct sunlight. So it shows the beginning of, I think, vinosity or development just in the appearance. It also stains the glass, just not quite that aggressively. And aromatically, this wine is meeting me, you know, 2/3 of the way out of the glass. I don't have to fight for it. Don't you love wines like that, that just give you, you know, so much right up front? And the first word I'm going to use is not descriptive of an element. It is complex. It is immediately, you know, it actually reflects that appearance of beginning of vinosity. And to define that, it means wininess as opposed to fruitiness. Smells and characteristics that develop with time, both in the barrel and in the bottle. And it's a wonderful aroma that I want to just simply shut up and enjoy, but I'm going to force myself to unselfishly describe it. So immediately what I get is actually a non-fruit smell of cedar, tobacco, which speak to development, but also probably the effect of wood and high quality wood at that. And on the heels of that, I'm getting both, you know, dominantly black currant and cassis with some red currant and red plum, and perfectly ripe. I don't think it's overripe in the least. I don't think it's at all underripe. It's just perfectly ripe, probably 2/3 black, 1/3 red fruit. And on the heels of that, I get flowers, both lavender and violet, but in this particular case, dried. And it's a good habit to get into perceiving an element, whether it's fruit or flowers or veg or herbs or other things, and then try to, don't fake it or reach for it if you're not perceiving it, but try to define the condition of it. Meaning in the case of fruit, you know, underripe, ripe, overripe, candied, confected, etc. So on the heels of the dried lavender and violet, I'm also getting dried herbs in the form really of tea leaf and, you know, kind of a mixed herbal element. And there's the tobacco leaf again, that's part of that element. And then again, by now I'm on to 4, 5, 6 elements that I'm perceiving, categories actually, is a little bit of pyrrhizine in the form of bell pepper. So there's a green element to this wine that is very integrated and not primal, but it's in there, absolutely. And that's important, as well as the dominant black fruit in this wine. What else? Certainly cocoa powder, cedar, coffee, dark chocolate, which speak to oak, but very integrated oak. It doesn't command my attention. It marches along and actually complements the fruit tremendously. And I haven't even taken it on the palate, so let's do that, Madeline, you know? Wine number 6, I swallowed most of it, you know, just because it's delicious.
Gorgeous.
And I like the mouthfeel. And what I perceived on the nose is absolutely being confirmed on the palate. So this wine is not only expressive, but it didn't fake me out, right? So there is immediately an element that I did not perceive on the nose. Maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention, but there's a very distinct inorganic earth element that comes through as graphite or lead pencil. A rockiness to it. There is some inorganic earth, some organic earth as well, but that's really not pulling my attention. Maybe a little bit of turned dirt that's, you know, mixed up with the dried herbs, shrooms and such, but other things too, a little bit of fennel, anise, cola, but, you know, just to remind us all, black and red fruit, perfectly ripe, vinosity, complexity, dried flowers and dried herbs, pyrrhizine, aka bell pepper, and oak influence. And how is the length? Interestingly, it's good. It's sufficient. I'm not supposed to use the word good because it doesn't mean anything. It is sufficient, but I will say it's it's medium plus, not long, but it's not disappointing. Frankly, the wine gives me so much up front and on the palate that I'm going to forgive it that it doesn't have a terrific length. The quality is absolutely and definitely there. And I will say, you know, I'm not, if I were tasting this wine, getting married to this idea, because, you know, it's a bad idea to get married to anything, you know, without justifying it deductively. Frankly, especially aromatically, it smells very Bordelaise to me, especially that combination of cedar, cigar box, graphite, blackcurrant, etc. So what are our options, Li Meng? Cabernet Sauvignon or blend, and we certainly described it as such. However, did we also describe Tempranillo and Syrah? Tempranillo, in my opinion, has also elements of red and black fruit, verging a little bit closer to, you know, super ripe or even overripe sometimes, and maybe red dominant, but, you know, not out of the question here whatsoever. The oak influence can be as strong as it is here. Occasionally, it will come across, you know, pretty clearly as American oak, though a lot of Rioja producers are moving away from using American oak exclusively. Syrah blend. And yes, indeed, we can do the same grape variety twice. So the question is, did we do it twice? Because Tim did, no surprise, a beautiful job of punching the defining elements of Syrah, which are especially that combination of savory pepper, black and white, in combination with the meatiness, right? Sanguine, which means bloody. So that's what we're considering. And all three of those, by the way, can be opaque visually. Tempranillo in the form of Rioja, sometimes a little more see-through because it has extended oak aging and have dropped off some of its color. Where are we considering in the old world and the new world? France, Spain, California, Australia. And you are all paying close attention, so I will let you figure out what goes with what and why.
Yeah, I think we're going to share the results, and
Yay.
just as we told everyone that we won't do the other, as Evan has said, I think we've done it here on the
Oh, well,
read.
this is really neat because this is, there are two guys in contention here, correct?
Yeah, so-
Cabernet Sauvignon and Tempranillo, and no votes for Syrah, probably because you figured we wouldn't do that, but we should probably do it, wink, wink, at some big point in time, just to say that we can.
So the wine
mhm.
region, I think, Madeline, might be helpful to
Mhm.
talk about old world versus new world. And again, given that you know where this is coming from, you can see that there's something wrong with the choices here. There's a bit of a typo.
Other, you have other.
Other,
Exactly.
and
And I would just want to say, we don't mean to tease. This was a typo. But we'll explain that in a little bit. I think that it's worth talking about this high percentage of 66% going with old world.
well, you know, again, we saw this in wine number one, didn't we? The reality is that there are new world growing regions who have become classic for specific grape varieties or styles of wine, and certainly new world growing regions that can, you know, express terroir with enthusiasm, which can come in the form of what we used to consider, and I'm, you know, going back village elder that I am, as old world markers. You can have organic and inorganic earthiness that is even dominant in a new world wine. So I think the takeaway for me, if I were to counsel anyone, including myself, is that the earth elements are part of the whole picture. Uh-oh, we're on the plane. Okay.
Bye-bye,
The
Cahors.
plane, we are leaving Cahors. We are going to take a relatively long trip from, they call it Southwestern France. It always looks more like Central to me, but hey, what do I know? And we are going back to Chile. I miss Chile today, you know? So this is New World, but it is what? Chilean, Cabernet Sauvignon, not Carmenere. The green elements are simply not dominant enough. And I have been educated, thanks to my dear friend Evan Goldstein, that quality Carmenere can be very green and very good all at the same time, if it's in balance. We are in the Valle Central, specifically the Maipo Valley. Going north to south, it's the northernmost. It is a warm growing region. It is near Santiago, which is why a lot of the top houses are centered there. And this is actually from fruit from the Alto Maipo, the districts of Puente Alto and Pirque. They didn't specify how much of which in their tech sheets, but the winery itself is located a little bit further in the central part of the Maipo, Isla do Maipo. And it is a cuvee called La Cancha. The De Martino family is on to their fourth generation of doing this work, starting from the 1930s. And they take it very seriously indeed. And if you read critical press, they are lauded for their work in Chile. This is a wonderful aspect facing east, I would well imagine, so we can see the foothills of the Andes. And both Puente Alto and Pirque are, you know, in the foothills, so they benefit from altitude and from breezes coming down from the mountains. So certainly, you know, the alcohol does not pull my attention on this. It's claiming 13%, so it's actually kind of low by New World standards. These very handsome, rugged, obviously hardworking men are brothers.
Actually,
Marco
Sebastian's on the left, Marco's on the right.
Marco's on the right. Oh, so we didn't do that
Well,
correctly.
you'll see, I think,
Mhm.
Sebastian, since you are listening in, I hope that you can join us. I'm going to flip the switch to make you a panelist in just a little bit.
Mhm.
Sebastian is in the room, so be nice
Yay,
about how he
Sebastian.
looks.
They're wonderful to have you here. And I'll just finish up quickly so then the person who touched the wine can talk about it. But I will tell you that, you know, this is Chile's most famous wine growing region and utterly classic region for Cabernet Sauvignon, with what, over 50% of the plantings are Cabernet. And just to remind us all, Cabernet is Chile's principal grape variety. You know, 1 to 6 in terms of Cabernet versus Carmenere. I was really excited to taste this wine because it is, you know, I think it's describing what I'm imagining in terms of a new world growing region, proving it can make utterly classic wines that have tremendous depth and potential for aging, and have a thumbprint of a growing region that includes very strong earth elements. So bravo to the De Martinos. And I'll let Sebastian talk about any technical matters later, but this is a wonderful ambassador, not just for Chile, but for Chilean Cabernet Sauvignon.
Nice to see you all. Thanks for having La Cancha in the tasting, which is something we're very proud of and something that we're trying to highlight the qualities of our vineyard. So thanks for having the wine.
Beautiful wine.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Seba, would you mind, obviously we have the benefit and the luxury of having you here, and thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join us. Perhaps for many of the folks who are on here who may not be as intimate with it as some of us are, can you maybe explain the differences in, you know, so much of the Cabernet that comes from the Maipo Valley comes from the lower levels, comes from the floor volumetrically. Yet there is a big difference as you move up in altitude towards the Andes. And there are so many of the most well-known of the Cabernets coming from Maipo that come from Maipo Andes, Alto Maipo, notably in places like Pirque and Puente Alto. Can you talk to us a little bit about what makes the fruit up there unique?
So, well, to begin with, I think our regions in Chile are geographically based. So when we talk about Maipo, it's not a small little place. So it expands from the Andes close to the coastal range. So it covers a lot of territory. So you can find different expressions of Cabernet and Carmenera, mainly Bordeaux varietals, including some very exciting whites, dry whites that are being made now in small quantities. Specifically in the case of the wine, La Cancha, it's actually from our own estate in a place that is called Isla de Maipo. So Isla de Maipo, just to correct a bit, is not in the foothills, it's more towards the coast.
No, thank you for correcting me because I couldn't find the information on
Well,
that. My bad.
My bad as well, because as from the next vintage, you'll see actually Maipo, Isla de Maipo in the label, because I think we're embracing Isla de Maipo. And one of the things that make every single part of Maipo different is like when we are, let's say, in Isla de Maipo, we are about 30 miles from the sea. So it's very common, especially in the warmest months, let's say your cooler months, this will be January and February and March, to have fog coming into the valley, to the place where we are, because we have the very similar expression of like your Pacific. So the fog, the closer you are to the sea, you have fog coming into this part of the valley. So in this specific vineyard in Isla de Maipo, we have no many hours of light. So it's very normal that the fog clears at 12, 1, 2 p.m., meaning that the hours of sunlight in the vineyard are not as much as other parts of Maipo. So there's the climate here, we need to understand that it's a Mediterranean mild climate with a maritime influence, because you have wind as well coming into the vineyard, breeze, so it's never torrid hot. So let's say a hot day in Isla de Maipo would be, apologies, in Celsius would be 30. That would be like, where it would be like, oh, it's super hot here, you know, but in other places that you go inland, temperatures rises. So the fact of having less hours of light in the warmest months and not being torrid hot allow us to ripen while preserving acid. If you see, La Cancha is 17 is, if my memory is not wrong, was 13 alcohol, the vintage, and 17 was generally a vintage in the warmish side, respectively in Chile. So just to give you an idea. So climate, one thing, very important. Then we're gonna get to the soils. Where we are here is alluvial soil, and it's purely gravel. As you see, gravel, 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 gravel. So La Cancha is, and the vineyard is you have a lot of influence in Maipo and the different Maipo parts about the river Maipo. After the glaciation, generated lots of rivers on the way to the sea and deposited different types of terraces of gravel. That's why Maipo is so popular with Cabernet. So depending where you are, up or down,
Pauillac, it's Omega.
It's very much like Pauillac or Margaux gravel. Where we are is more like the Margaux gravel. So one element that is very specific in our vineyard as well is actually we recently discovered it because when you're saying the descriptor of graphite, which I love on all those, I love all those wines, was calcium carbonate as well. So we discovered that a month ago. So actually I'm releasing something that is totally unheard of. But so we did some work, and there's also the gravel with some calcium carbonate. So there's a bit of a mineral BT on the palate. So I think what makes in particular really unique La Cancha is the climate, is the old Masal selections as well. You know, we still have Masal selections that in our case provide the best deal. These are ungrafted vines that are reaching maturity, so they're 25 years old, so they're reaching interesting age. And you have the climate that allows us to produce a wine that it's in the ripe side, but still remaining, you know, fresh acidity. And there's another element that is very important for us. We grew up in Isla de Maipo. We grew up tasting different types of wine with my brother and my family. And the type of wines that we like generally are more lean towards harmony. So we like wines that are long rather than width. We like wines that age well and preserve acid, and you have different layers of complexity. So it's very important for us also to be very gentle with extraction, be very gentle with the oak treatment as well. So generally we will age in foudre, like we will age in 5,000 liter foudre, so very old school. So the wine is fermented in tank, wild yeast, and then we move after fermentation, maceration, to the foudre of 5,000 liter, which will generally stay about 18 months. Some years 2 winters, some years 18 months, depending when we believe the wine is ready. And we always say that something that makes a Isla Maipo, this part of where we live, special is the fragrance. There's a very charming fragrance on it, and it's not very heady as a Cabernet. There's some Cabernets that are very heady, very structured. No, in Isla Maipo, we don't achieve that, and we don't want to achieve that. We lean more towards the fragrance of the variety, more towards the intensity and length, and trying to make a wine that is very opulent. And we have that in mind. We have some very good examples of the wines made by my grandfather, also like the old bottles of the 80s. At the time, you know, there was no barrique at the time, so you pick basically March before the rain, and the wines have a very charming cigar notes, complexity that goes in time, but at the same time, it's a wine that it's a Cabernet that makes you smile. You know, it's not a Cabernet that makes you, you know, feel too serious. We love the idea of claret, the old idea of claret. We love it, and we embrace it. And I think La Cancha is a very good example of what we're trying to do. It's a
I
very
think it comes through aromatically right away. You know, I think you've got what you're aiming for.
Thank you.
And I would also add, Sebastian, that your sensibility towards Cabernet is reflected not just in La Concha, but in all the Cabernets you make as well, Legado and the others. You bring that same approach towards this, not that you talked about, and it's reflective in all of your Cabernet-based wines. Bravo.